Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and I'm back this week for another acrylic painting tutorial, although some of this could probably be applied to oils as well. So a couple of years back, I did a video talking about the tips for better brushwork, how to really get the most out of how you use your brushes. Well, today it's time, overtime I'd say, even especially, for the companion to that, tips for better knife work. Painting knives have been used for, centuries. As long as painting has existed with a brush, you've probably seen artists using knives to mix their paint, but at some point then also applying that paint directly to the canvas with the knives themselves. And while applying, paint with a knife is pretty straightforward, when you start breaking things down and really analyzing exactly what you can do with every shape and every edge of that knife, much like brushwork, you can really elevate your work going forward. Now before we really jump into this, I want to talk a little bit about shapes and styles of different painting knives and palette knives. A simple basic painting knife gonna look something like this. You get that nice sort of angled teardrop shape, and it's gonna be good for mixing paint, moving it around, but it's thin enough that you can do some more expressive painting with it. A standard palette knife is gonna be a little bit more like a trowel, slightly larger, more of an angle here, and they come in all kind of different shapes and sizes in between. Some of them have little ridges and flutes to them, specifically for the reason of doing textured knife painting. And of course, once you have a couple of these, I have a rounder one here somewhere, something like that. Again, different shapes, creating all kind of different things. There are a number of companies like Liquitex that make bigger, more trowel-esque knives. I really like this one for large-scale painting. As you can tell, it has a little bit of dried paint on it. From some projects I've done in the past year or so. And of course, again, all kind of different shapes and sizes here. You can go up to huge sizes, or you can really just keep it nice and simple down to your, basic 2. Now, one thing that's important to note about a painting knife is that a painting knife, while very similar to a trowel or something you might get out of your hardware store, a hardware store knife is going to be a much thicker metal and have a lot less flex. I mean, there's a little flex here. Sure, it's designed to be more rigid, to be, applying thick joint compound and plaster to a wall. I mean, even a much, larger knife like this, there's a little flex there, but it's not the kind of flex you get out of a painting knife. This is a lot thinner of a metal, and in this case, you're going to be able to do a lot more with it, and you definitely can't bend a knife from the hardware store like this, and that is on purpose. Now, a big factor in painting with a knife comes with the viscosity of your paint. Unlike brushwork, which you can do with any thickness of paint, using a knife almost somewhat dictates you use a thicker paint like a medium or a heavy body, or even something like a gel or a paste to build out texture. But real quick, to kind of show you what I mean, I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this fluid ultramarine blue off to my palette on the side here and just grab a knife. And with that, you can spread that around and you can get some expressive marks with that, but in general, you're not going to be able to get a good thick layer. You have to really kind of use multiple layers of that paint to really build that up. Now, on the other hand, a heavy body like this thick Mars Black, you can really apply down thick and then really kind of sculpt with that paint. In many ways, when I'm working with a knife and doing things like that, I tend to refer to this as like paint sculpting, because you can get all kind of unique and interesting texture with the knife itself. Additionally, knives aren't strictly about just applying that paint. It also can be a lot about scraping it back. There's a lot to be said for applying, a basic layer of paint and then pulling that away in different areas and just working with that residue of what's left. And in working what's left, and even just using more of those sculptural techniques, you can do something a bit more subtractive and then create all of these grooves and then, of course, paint over top of that a little bit later to get that varying dynamic and shift in the actual texture of the piece itself. Turning that up on its side a little bit, you can see those distinct ridges right on the edge of the paper. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the actual kind of shapes and things you can get out of all these different knives. Much like a brush, utilizing the entire shape of the knife itself is a really valuable thing. I'm actually going to go ahead and slide my palette over here a little bit to show you guys. Loading up the knife as well is not just simply, rubbing it back and forth. You can scrape it, cut it, really kind of work that in. figure out exactly where you need. I actually have this overlay right now. I'm trying to avoid that. Loading that paint up, and then simply, you can use the tip. You can dab with the whole knife to get that shape. You can just use that fine edge. I love doing this for like water lines and stuff. Late in the piece, especially if I'm doing, thin water lines and scraping in those tight areas like that. Obviously, because you're just using that really flat, tiny edge of the knife, you have to keep dipping back for paint a little bit more often, grab that a bit, and as it builds up on the knife, you might run into having those lumps in there, which can be a desirable look, and it can also be a very undesirable look. So it really takes a lot of practice. You can pull with that whole shape, dab with that, slap that on there, scrape it back. When you get a nice thick bead of paint on that tip, it rounds out a little bit, and everything in between. Now, knives, again, like brushes, are a little bit more limited in their shapes. You can't push and manipulate them quite as much as you can with the bristles of a brush. But that's where it comes into play of having just a couple different knife shapes to, best work with exactly what you want to do. So this is a lot more angular, get, a lot more of those hard edge shapes. A rounder knife is going to allow you to get, that rounder push. The tip of the knife does a lot of work, but the back of the knife can certainly do so as well, really laying that down and everything like that. I've seen a lot of artists do a lot of different work with knife work and layering, paint on paint and doing these whole unique rainbow structures. All of that makes it is really, really possible in that individual shape that you get from layering those thick blobs of paint happen from different shapes of the knife. And of course, there's the traditional angled palette knife. This was Bob Ross's favorite. It was always the, mix your paint up and then cut down to the side to get that little beady roll of paint on the end. And of course, that's how he used his paint and his painting to create that perfect angled shape of a mountain. And building out rocks this way, it's a choice. I don't always do it. I personally find that the freedom of a brush and the shape of certain brushes to be a lot more effective. But it is certainly a way to really quickly and easily build out a lot of basic rocky shapes in something like a landscape painting. And typically, if I am doing that thin waterline work, I am doing it with this particular knife because it has that nice long edge, and it just makes it a lot easier to slowly kind of work in those thinner lines. Now, as mentioned before, you're able to sculpt and work with that paint, or in this case, gel, a little bit more. Here's a sample I did on a piece of canvas board using some of this golden high solid gel. It's a nice thick acrylic gel medium that allows you to get all of these really unique thick textures and peaks. I'm not sure if that's even going to show up super well, but you can get it on the raking light here a little bit. I did a couple of dabs. This one I kind of scraped away as I showed before, and this is just a basic simple little crisscross pattern with the knife. When you have this down, whether this be the first layer with a gel or a paste, or if you're coming in with a color and then a color on top of this for all kind of different techniques, this is where using a knife can really be utilized in a more effective way, in a dynamic way with a brush. So I'm going to grab a little cadmium yellow heavy body off to the side here. And, just with a basic flat brush here, I'm just going to grab a little bit of paint and dry brush over top of these surfaces to see this amplified texture. Those thicker areas, those bigger peaks are picking up on a lot more color, while the underlying sort of valleys are, letting that paint just spread to the canvas as it normally would. It's these bigger ridges where you start running into the more effective means of applying that color. And they're basically like little waves. And depending on how you apply your paint with a knife or a brush, you get all of these different, interesting, unique techniques, all capable of a thicker paint or medium and a little bit of knife work. Okay, so a little final test of technique and demonstration here. I decided to do a quick little painting with, I try to use basically every knife that I showed you guys in this video. So using a knife really allows you to create these really unique, expressive layers, whether you're doing it for the entire piece or just, you know, a couple of either starting layers or finishing layers, whatever you happen to do. It's a fantastic way to build out unique texture and unique, just a general unique visual component to a piece. It adds a lot more expression to your work, and lately in my own paintings, I've been trying to utilize it a lot more often, particularly larger scale stuff with the larger, more trowel style knives. That said, there are certainly some limitations here. You're not going to be able to get absolutely incredible detail unless, of course, you are really scaling up the size of your piece. But as I mentioned earlier, you can do quite a lot with simple layering and then just scraping back in different ways. And I think this quick little piece illustrates that perfectly. So that is my look at all the different ways you guys can use knives and utilize them more effectively in your own work. Remember that while knife painting is not required, it can absolutely elevate your work to a whole new level. And whether you're an experienced artist or you're just starting out, getting your knife skills up to snuff will really help you make better paintings in the long run. But I'm curious what you guys have to say on this one. Do you utilize knife painting in your work? And if you haven't, has this video inspired you to pick one up for yourself? Regardless of your situation, I hope you enjoyed this one, learned something. If you did, hit the like button, let me know your thoughts and comments below. And it's been reminding you to keep on creating, stay inspired, and I will see you guys next time. This is weird, I'm actually recording the outro before the bulk of the entire video. I don't want to go back and forth with it because I gotta set the table up.